Okay guys, welcome back from the mid-semester break, not that you probably went anywhere. Today we're doing implement training and conditioning. This one it's a little bit difficult to do online because we got you guys to play with all these different implements that you may not have been exposed to. Many gyms now have a lot of the stuff, but especially like when I started doing gym, you would never find hammers and tires and sleds and ropes in the gyms. So, you may have played with some of this gear, but you definitely probably wouldn't have thrown a keg. You don't often do the chain training and that in the gym. So there should still be some stuff that you've never seen before in here, but it's definitely a shoot that, it's a good shoot that we just sort of have a play with gear. So essentially you'll just see Graham and I doing the exercises, and then we'll have to, at some point when you get an opportunity to do it, have a go at all these different exercises. So let's get into it. So when we're doing conditioning and a lot of this implement training, the goal is to increase local muscular endurance. And Graham and I are going to have to consciously tone back the physiology in this shoot because you guys haven't done exercise physiology yet. So I'm assuming that you guys at least understand that we have the ATP creatine phosphate system, the glycolysis system, and the aerobic system. So we're going to try and keep it sort of at that level. Some of you may have a higher level and a good understanding, and some may be pretty new to this concept. So we'll sort of probably try and sit in the middle somewhere there. So we'll keep it to that context. So the pure definition of local muscular endurance is the ability of one muscle or group of muscles to sustain repeated contractions against a sub-maximal resistance. So, if Graham could do, just again, arbitrary numbers, 100 kilos or something, we back it back to sort of somewhere between 50 and 70 kilos, and now he has to do heaps of reps. And that will be dependent on the rep range. So if he was at the 50 kilos, 50%, he'll be up over sort of 20, 25 reps, and 70 kilos might be 50 reps, depending on what exercise is in the movement pattern. We also can use this in things like cycling and stuff like that as well. So it's not just resistance training exercises. We term this, the sort of jargon we use is conditioning, and you may hear other trademark companies call it something else, but it is definitely conditioning. And the adaptations that we're mainly seeking are peripheral adaptations. So by that we mean at the actual muscle. So I'm trying to get adaptations at my bicep rather than more central changes. So, heart, stroke volume increase. So I can't go too in depth with that because you guys aren't probably all over that yet, but a lot of the changes in cardiovascular training are central changes. So our heart chambers get bigger. We have more blood volume or plasma volume and stuff like that. So the energy systems of this type of training, what will happen is generally we're trying to increase, with conditioning, our ability to work in the anaerobic energy systems. So that's your ATP phosphocreatine system and our glycolytic system. So you guys might know that both of them combine into the anaerobic system. And then when we do these sessions, what you'll see is the anaerobic system gets depleted, and there'll be progressively more contribution from the aerobic system. So the energy is being generated through the aerobic system, even though we're doing this stop-start type training. It's very dependent on the work-rest ratio. So Graham and I are going to talk a lot about work-rest ratios. And what you guys may have heard in the industry is we're looking for creating enough of an energy deficit so that our body has to consume more energy at the end of exercise or in recovery. And it's been termed like afterburn, but the actual term is EPOC, so excess post-oxygen consumption. That's all done by the aerobic system to recover all the other systems. So in the end, all energy and work that we do is supplied by the aerobic system. And you guys are going to learn more about this in exercise physiology, but we created, always get this the wrong way around, we create a deficit and then we have to pay back the debt. Is that the right way? Yeah. Keeping it super basic, you guys can go and read more into that if you want, but we're trying to develop the anaerobic system generally in the conditioning type exercises. But as we do more intervals, there will be more contribution from the aerobic system, so we will be developing that system as well. This is getting very heavy on the exercise physiology, but I just put it here to show you. This comes from Dale's slides in exercise physiology. The take home here, if you can see my arrow hopefully, I don't know if they can see the arrow on this, but on the first pie graph, you can see there's a large, well, it's a larger pie graph, so that means that the actual energy used in our first interval, so this is a 30-second bike test, and I'm pretty sure it was 4 minutes between, and then another 30-second bike test. And then they've measured the contribution from the different systems. So you can see in the first bigger one, they've done actually more work in the first interval, and then in the second one, there's less work and there's more contribution from the aerobic system. That's all you guys need to take home from this slide at the moment. You'll see this slide again in exercise physiology, and you'll have to understand it much more in depth. This is another one. This is actually from Dale's studies. And he likes to compare upper and lower body a lot. And I just wanted to show you this one because a lot of the conditioning tools that you'll see in gyms use a lot of the upper body stuff. So you got the rope waves, what else we got upper body? A lot of guys use boxing for conditioning, arm ergo. There's a lot of arm exercises, and then just sort of like your repetitive weightlifting type movements and all that. There's a lot of arm upper body contribution, and the upper body doesn't have as well a developed aerobic system, so that may be because of more type 2 fiber types. And then there's also a little bit less efficiency and economy in the movements upper body, so you actually have more contribution from the anaerobic system compared to the lower body. So you have to be aware of that too when you're making programs if you're doing, all upper body conditioning. We'll try and turn this into a chat at some point.
Not much for me to say.
So you would have been exposed to a whole heap of different examples for this. All these types of training that I've listed here, so circuits, interval training, implement training, group exercise, boot camp, as many reps as possible, all these kind of systems are generally developing anaerobic conditioning at the muscle. Okay, so they're all very much doing the same thing. So if you could do a body pump session, you can do, like say you're doing a body pump session with a lot of legs in it, and then you go do sprint sessions on the bike, you're going to get very similar adaptations. I say similar because it won't be exactly the same, but the attributes of the muscle that we're trying to improve will be very similar, especially if we're doing high volume, high intensity work in our legs, squatting or cycling. Obviously there's some movement mechanic stuff differently there and motor control stuff there, but the actual physiology adaptations are very similar. The reason I put this slide in there is because you always hear people within the fitness industry saying this is better than that, and quite often it's very much creating the same stimulus. So, and I'm not mentioning too many actual companies out there, but generally whenever a new trend comes out, it is somebody will say that their new trend is better than everything else that's ever happened, and if you have a good understanding of physiology, you understand that it's pretty much just another version of a circuit or a conditioning session, just done with new exercises. So it's developing the same attributes. So implement training, now this can be used, and they get used a lot for conditioning, so that's why it's in this chute, but it's also very much a strongman event, so it can be used in the other stuff that we've talked about in other slides, so developing power and strength. And it's great for like alternative cross-training sessions to keep people interested. So we've made you a exercise library of just Graham and I doing these exercises, and I just suggest that you guys get in and have a go at each of these when the gyms start opening up again and you've got something to do. Graham, you can butt in whenever you get a chance, but it's very much a lecture style today. There's not too much to chat about. So here's just a sort of a definition thing that you guys need to be aware of. So interval versus intermittent, it's a hard word to say. And a lot of people use it, like interchange them, but they are technically different. So interval training is generally when there'll be like a lower intensity active rest. So fartlek trainings, you can do it pretty random. So say you're going out for a jog and sort of randomly between power poles, you do a little bit of a sprint, so maybe every third power pole you sprint and then you jog to the next two. So that's fartlek training. That can be pretty random, your different intervals, different intensity, but you continue to jog in your recovery. Same thing in like a spin class where they'll make you do like a 30-second sprint. You've got any other interval training examples that you throw in there?
No, not really. You pretty well named it. I find that the interval training is a lot more transferable to sport.
Yeah.
It's very rare that you'll have a burst of energy or an effort in sport and then stop for a minute or two. Research shows that recovery outcomes are much better in the active recovery as well, just because that passive rest, the aerobic system is working to shuttle wasted nutrients from the muscle back to the heart, which is going to help with that hypoxic lactate kind of feeling. It's that active recovery that helps shuttle all the waste away from the local muscle.
Yeah, and we do shoots on that in exercise physiology too, guys, so you get to feel the lactate burn and how to recover. And then so intermittent training, I can't say it very well, sorry. That's where we do our pure like high intensity interval training and our sprint interval training. And that actually gets a little bit confusing because you've got interval written in here. But when these things are done correctly and you see it in the research, a high intensity interval training looks nothing like what you see advertised at, say, your local HIIT class. So a HIIT class and and all those other branded group exercise classes usually sit more in this interval training, and I wouldn't even call them high intensity usually. So a high intensity interval session, according to the literature, is, and you guys will see us do this, is like a repeated wind gate. So where we'll do 30 seconds as hard as possible, 2 minutes complete passive rest because you're dying, and then you'll go 30 seconds hard again. And you see that varies, but there's definitely a passive rest, and your intensity's at 90, 95%, usually 100%, like you're going as maximum effort. So you couldn't run an hour class of proper high intensity training. And that's why it actually looks more like, and that's why my argument earlier is they're very much the same thing with just different exercises. Then you've got like sprint interval trainings, which we'll talk about later, where we're trying to develop that ATP creatine phosphate system, but the ability to repeat sprints. So you might do like a 5-6 second sprint with a 24-30 second recovery to allow that creatine to replenish so that you can go again. And again, like and 10 of those and you're pretty wrecked. We got something similar for Graham. Graham's going to do, we got a video that will show you of a yo-yo test, which is very much a test of your sprint capacity.
Yeah. And more that reserve of energy.
Yeah.
So while there's conditioning where we want to kind of stimulate the ATP PCR system, there are also tests where we want to see how repeat efforts add up and how we work switching from ATP more towards that lactate and anaerobic environment.
Yeah.
So while they look like it's more back to back to back, we're not looking to improve the ATP PCR system and sprintability, but more look how that decrement affects us.
Yeah, yeah. And you see throughout the literature, it's very much the aerobic system replenishing that. And then the contribution from the aerobic system increases. In my honours thesis, I read a lot that you almost like shut down the glycolytic system, and it's like ATP, CP and aerobic system working together the whole time.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting, and the reason we're talking about this is because you're developing very different things, the different ratios of rest, time and intensity that you program.
Yeah. I would say no matter what sport or what adaptation you're looking for, never discount the merit of the aerobic system, because at the end of the day, your ATP and your anaerobic systems might be the ones that give you that immediate energy, but it's your aerobic system that helps replenish that at the end. That's the one that's shuttling all the waste out, bringing oxygen back into the system to repeat efforts.
And when you guys get further down the track of this course, you'll look at things called time motion analysis studies, and you'll look at what the athletes are actually doing, sprint to rest ratios and stuff like that, and you design your programs around that. You did much of that in your basketball? Yeah.
I think basketball, by memory, they spent 5% of game time sprinting, about 40 to 60% aerobic.
Yeah, I looked at it like with surfing, it's like 80% of the times paddling at a slow pace, so it gets very interesting when you analyse it, and then you start trying to design programs according to the actual event that you're doing. Let's move on. So proper high intensity training, so you've got set work rest ratios usually. These can include, so it's very much high intensity, so you've got stair runs, hill sprints, you can do shuttles, high repetition resistance training, and Tabata. But just remember that these high intensity sessions, like the actual intervals, supposed to be like max effort and then passive recovery. So if you can continue moving on, your client or yourself hasn't done a proper intense exercise. If you can move straight from one exercise to the other, you're not at 100%. So I spent a bit of time looking at the literature on fat loss and high intensity training last year. And what was very interesting, because all these programs continually advertise that you burn fat more effectively from doing high intensity training. When you match the actual work done in the session, there's no real significant increase in fat loss. So the main benefit is that it's more time efficient. So, and but the thing is, it can be very painful. So a lot of people don't like it. So you got to decide whether it suits your client, whether their training age is up to speed, whether they've got the time to recover. So with like your guys, like how often could you do a proper high intensity interval training session?
Yeah, conditioning can be where you really lose some clients or lose some athletes, because usually it has a very negative connotation. Like as a kid growing up in sport, you almost always remember this kind of stuff as a punishment for doing something wrong. So it's up to us as coaches and health professionals to kind of reshape that and show the merit in conditioning, and not throw everything at a wall and see what sticks, but more use it as a tool to actually develop something. So, you know, like with athletes, I mean, with clients, I might throw like 2 30-second sprints with 2 minutes off in between it at the end of a session here and there. But, you know, 30 minutes of high intensity interval training, there's no way they're coming back. Most people can't handle it. And they don't need it.
So most of your effects in fat loss come to diet, guys, and you'll learn that more anyway. The biggest benefit from high intensity interval training, I think, is the time efficiency, and it definitely improves your fitness in the aerobic system and the aerobic system much quicker than, say, long, slow distance jogging.
And our goal is to improve the capacity of these energy systems. So if my capacity's here, my interval training should be maybe just here or just here for repeated efforts. If I'm putting the bar up here for someone to achieve repeatedly, they're going to fail, they're going to pull up really sore, they're not going to want to come back. And physiologically, it doesn't work. You couldn't put 150% of your max weight on a barbell and attempt to squat it, and conditioning is very much the same. We can't just punish someone and expect them to get better. It needs to be within their capability.
And that's the tricky little balance, you know, because if you're doing one of those group exercise classes that I've sort of alluded to, you might be working the anaerobic system for the first 3 intervals, and then you're probably very much heavily reliant on the aerobic system to get through the last 45 minutes or 40 minutes.
Especially if we're not policing these rest periods.
We've
banged on about how important rest periods are in strength training. In conditioning, rest periods are king. If you get the rest period wrong, you will not get the adaptation that you want.
So you just like, and always in my head, it's risk reward, right? So if I'm, you know, within 5 minutes, I'm pretty much doing a lot of aerobic system work, and I'm doing exercises that under fatigue become dangerous. I'm like, why are we doing that if we're just really improving in the aerobic system? I could just go for a jog. Whereas if I'm trying to improve my anaerobic capacity, I'm going to do something that's specific for that, whether that's, you know, if my sport involves running, you know, 200 meter sprint repeats, or something that's shorter, say if I'm a rugby league athlete, where it's like 40 meter sprint repeats. So it's, you know, very specific on what you're doing, very specific on the adaptations as well. So you've got to be really aware of what you're trying to do.
A lot of the time our prescriptions can be wrong as well. Not in the way that we've prescribed them wrong, but on the day, the person just might not be up to the task. Say you have someone to do 5 or 6 repeats of a 20-second effort, but by that third effort, you can see they're not really in that range of intensity they want, or you want. Maybe they're starting to get more into that aerobic system, they're blowing. There's absolutely no benefit to making them do all that work if it's not in the intensity and in the energy system you want. So a lot of the time we have to be very intuitive with how they're presenting, how their work's looking, how well they're performing the reps. A lot of the time we have to kind of pull back, and then if there's days where maybe you've prescribed 6 sets of something, they've smashed it, you go, you know what? Let's push 7. You've got another one in here. So it's very intuitive.
And I think what I need to make a point here, that I made in the strength training session one as well, I think. If I take somebody who's doing nothing and has done nothing for a long time, anything here will make them fitter. We're trying to improve specific attributes to get their optimal possible performance for that person genetically. So if I take any Joe Blow off the street and we just do a 45-minute conditioning session, he will get fitter, his health outcomes will be higher, all that kind of stuff. He may overtrain a little bit and may get injured, but when we're talking conditioning, take someone who's done nothing, any sort of conditioning work will work. Now we're talking, all right, I'm trying to develop this person's ability to play 80 minutes of rugby league. Just doing that same 45-minute random conditioning session is not going to be effective.
Yeah, it's very rare that there's right or wrong. Well, not in the fact, wrong can still do something, but it's not efficient, it's not safe, and it's not as maybe fast as what we could do.
Yeah, and you've got, remember, especially if you're with athletes, we've only got 8 sessions a week with this person, so we don't want to be wasting sessions. But with professional athletes, maybe once a month we'll throw a random implement conditioning session in just for something different, bit of actual cross training. But that'll be just something novel, refreshing type.
It's more about up here.
Yeah. Rather than that's like their whole workout for the rest of their lives. Repeated sprint ability. So this is very much what my honours project was on. So it's very high intensity. So you're running at 100%. We have a much larger rest than work ratio. So we were doing, and this is my honours project, 6 seconds on, 24 seconds off. Those ratios can change slightly. Sometimes you might see a 5 second on, 30 second off or something like that, but it's always that much larger ratio than the work. We're developing the phosphocreatine system as well as its recovery and ability to replenish it. Like all this conditioning session, as you get further down, so we were doing 10 intervals in my honours. By the end, you definitely, your ability to produce speed and power is decreased, so there's more aerobic system for the actual exercise itself as well. And like we discussed before, the aerobic system is very much involved in the recovery of that. So in the context of developing programs for your clients, these are the things, well, some of the things that you need to consider. So very much client training status, high intensity work, as I'm sure many of you guys have felt because you guys are sporties, it's hard, it hurts. I'm very much, in my mind, especially for you guys who are going to end up in like personal training, exercise physiology, general population, a lot of my goal is just to try and redevelop a positive attitude towards exercise. So throwing somebody into high intensity interval training is not necessarily creating a life of physical activity. I'm very much against using things like burpees and suicides as punishment for young athletes and people like that, because that creates a negative psychology around that. So you'd almost want to punish them by they're not allowed to do the activity anymore, and everyone else gets to do like interval training together. So that'd probably be more young athlete type stuff, but I think you've got to be aware of the relationship you're creating, like the lifelong relationship you're creating. So you don't want to just throw people in and hurt them. What is their goal? Is always huge. So do they want to be building aerobic capacity quickly? Most of your guys might want to be increasing a little bit of muscle mass and increasing a little bit of fitness and losing fat. So you don't need to, if I've got a 120 kilo guy who hasn't trained, there's no need for me to actually just smash them with a hard, high intensity interval training session that they're not ready for, when the most benefits from fat loss come from changing his diet. So we can just do something that makes him leave the gym feeling good, something that will stimulate muscle growth, stimulate a little bit of increased cardiovascular ability, and he leaves and he wants to come back because he feels okay.
I think it's an important time to address the fact that conditioning and aerobic and this conditioning style training is not the only way to lose fat and burn fat. Resistance training very much has a potent effect on burning body fat. May as well address that myth right here, that if you have a fat loss client, you don't just get them to walk on a treadmill for 50 minutes. Resistance training also has a very potent effect on consuming oxygen.
And to be honest, I always try and sell my clients on diets for fat loss, and then the stuff we do in the gym is for maintenance, increasing muscle mass, because I myself tried to out-train diets for like 10, 15 years, and then I started seeing Gary Slater, and I actually saw proper results. So I was always ate reasonably well, but once I started calorie controlling, eating more lean protein, I got way more lean than I ever have, and then I was able to maintain it with that knowledge. So exercise itself, I like to use the example of like your rugby league players. So a lot of those professional rugby league players, they train 8 to 10 times a week. They play a game once a week, and many of them are still carrying a lot of jelly. So they can't out-train it, so why do you think you can out-train it? It's very much diet. Moving on, so is it suitable? Will it transfer? So if you're dealing with an athlete, is this going to transfer to their sport? Like, what are we doing it for? Is it suitable for them? Are they injured?
I think this is a double-edged sword as well. A lot of the time I see people go wrong and say the context of a basketball athlete, they spend all of their time running up and down hard wooden court.
Yeah.
So you'd think that, all right, we'll get them running on court so they're comfortable running on court, and that might not be a negative. That might be a negative, sorry. If they train on a really crappy court that isn't sprung, really hard, stiff, basketball shoes, often very stiff-soled, so we can get a lot of power out of the ground.
Yeah.
That's going to cause a lot of trauma through the shins and the legs with shin splints or medial tibial stress syndrome. So while getting them to run on court is the most transferable skill, it might actually be of a detriment to their health and conditioning. So suitability and transfer can go both ways. There can be too much of sport-specific training. Yeah,
it goes back to that individuality, right? So basketball players are 6'6", 105 kilos, hard floors. That stuff's going to wear down on them. So maybe 2 sessions, 3 sessions a week are on court, some are on grass.
Yep. Or even on a bike. Like we said, often the task doesn't matter. If we're using the same musculature, we're probably going to get the same muscular adaptation.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with getting them to do half of their conditioning on bike if it's going to save their feet, save their lower limbs.
Yeah.
And then we can do our more skill determined work. So their actual basketball drills, maybe some sprint testing, change of direction stuff. We can do that on court, save the conditioning for the bike where we're not beating them up.
Yeah. This is always a big one in all your training, guys. Stimulate, don't annihilate. Okay, we don't get results in gym or in the conditioning session. We get results when you go home, recover, sleep, and the body adapts and makes us better at it. So there's no use just destroying people in the gym, because quite often, like I talked about in one of the other shoots, we just go back to where we were. You go into alarm phase, and it's like a scab. It's just trying to return back to normal. It's not creating stronger skin. These are the big questions, guys. What do you want to achieve? Okay, and that kind of comes back to what we talked about. You've very much got to think about, are we training? So training in my mind is we're trying to improve attributes, or are we just exercising, which is just what general public go do at the gym. And then if it's just exercise, is it worth the risk? All those kind of questions. Fat loss after burn, so that's just a lot of the marketing stuff after high intensity interval training got popular. And you guys will look into that more, but I'm not necessarily super excited about it as a mechanism for fat loss. It can definitely assist, but nothing sort of beats the diet. A lot of the reason we do conditioning type training is to preserve muscle mass whilst improving our capacity to do work. So remember we talked about that endurance training, so long distance running, has detrimental effects to strength and power. So doing this, we can still improve our ability to do work and conditioning without losing the strength and power. And that's why it's become quite common for athletes to do this type of training. Yeah. It's very much time efficient, and that's probably the biggest benefit. You'll get fitness benefits quickly, not necessarily fat loss benefits quickly. I want to sort of draw that distinction there. So I can make Graham fitter quicker if I had him, say, doing intervals on a bike rather than doing 1 hour sessions on a bike. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll be leaner quicker. So that's probably, in my mind, high intensity training, preserving muscle and time efficiency. But you've got to be very careful on overtraining. Yep. So that's probably the drawback.
I think this stuff is really important because there are still coaches out there making athletes run kilometers and kilometers and kilometers for a sport where they'd maybe never run more than 50 meters at a time.
Yeah.
There's still Aussie rules football coaches that are making players run laps and laps and laps where your longest effort might be 100 meters max.
Yeah, because the GPS data says 20 Ks, so they're like, oh, you got to do 20K runs.
Yeah, so if you want to be a good coach and you want to be good at conditioning and getting results out of your athletes, understand what it is that they need and understand the physiology, because the days of just running to get fitter are dead. It doesn't work. It just beats your athletes up, and they'll hate you for it.
Boxers still run 10Ks before sessions. I still don't understand why the swimmers still, like 50-meter sprint swimmers, you'll see them doing lap after lap after lap. Like they talk about it being for technique, but you could probably do it. Technique changes the quicker you go, so laps don't make sense to me there. That's beyond my knowledge, but I still look at like a 50-meter sprint swimmer doing 2,000 meters. I'm like, why is he doing that? But this is the thing in sport. All right, moving on. So we're going to talk a little bit of programming, and we've just given you some examples of things that you can do. You guys can take this and go much further. So one of the pyramids that I've done before and work with people is we do like ascending sprint pyramids on treadmills or on the bike. So you can increase the speed each interval and then decrease the speed. And you might have been doing 20 intervals over a 30-minute period. They're sprinting, stand on the sides of the treadie, come back up sprinting, but it's a little bit faster. So you can play with pyramids.
That pyramid kind of works the same with your programming over a month block as well.
Yeah.
Say you're doing work rest ratios and you're giving maybe 4 sets. You're not going to give 4 sets every week for a month. No. It's probably going to go 4, 5, 6, 6, 5, 4, that kind of thing. We're just trying to accumulate that body of work.
Yeah. So still in your blocks, guys, you're doing block periodization with this stuff as well. You can play around with the set number and work rest ratio. That's sort of, I was alluding to like the gym-based stuff. There's only a few actual resistance training exercises that I'm actually happy to do for conditioning. Yep. Many of them are very bastardized, but you can play with that. I'm sure you've all done like a work done based activity where say you're on the rower and you've got to punch out say 15, 20 watts every 2 minutes or something like that. I haven't done this for a while, so I don't know how long that takes, but every 2 minutes you got to do 15 watts or something like that. Calories. Yeah, you very much learn how important calories in versus calories out are when you track your calories trying to do work. The most easiest way to program this stuff is purely on time, so it's either like 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, or you go every 30 seconds. We got an example of this where Graham goes. We got a 20-meter sprint and Graham goes on every 10 seconds. So his recovery is based on how quickly he gets to the 20 meters. Another example that we used to do a little bit was heart rate based recovery. So we bring you up as hard as you can up the stairs or something like that. You walk back down and then you go again when your heart rate's back at 70 beats per minute. Something like that. So we're using heart rate to say that you've adequately recovered. And you can use heart rate the other way where you're using that as the point that you're trying to achieve as well.
Yeah.
So programming stuff. If we're trying to mainly improve the ATP phosphocreatine system, it's going to usually be short, so think sprints. So it's very intense, but we have a longer passive recovery. So this is very much like our strength and power programming. 1-to-4 ratio up to 1-to-8 ratio. So that's kind of like my honors project I was talking about. So a quick example there is we did a 10-second sprint at 95 seconds, at 95% intensity, and we have 40 seconds recovery. So we've got an example of that on the bike that we'll show you. We'll put this after the slide, eh? Yeah. So you can quickly see you did that one, eh? Graham do this one.
So you could imagine if that ATP system usually lasts us around 10 seconds, 8 to 10 seconds. So a 10-second effort, I'm going to be pretty well depleting that energy system. Could you imagine if I had a shorter rest period, so I only had 10, 20 seconds to recover, am I using that energy system in the next bout? Almost definitely not, maybe half of it.
Yeah, the first
so
like
that's
2-3
why
seconds.
The work rest ratios are so important, is make it the work needs to be a length of time where you're using that energy system predominantly and maybe backing off before you're bridging over into the next one, but then also giving enough time to replenish it and then challenge it again.
Yeah. And then, you know, even by, like I was saying before, at 40 seconds, you're not going to 100% recover. So by that sort of 10th set of that, it's going to be heavily aerobic again anyway.
And that's how we get our stimulus.
Yeah.
That's where our physiology goes like, okay, I need to get better at replenishing this so I can repeat efforts.
Yeah.
And that's why we only want to be just within our means to give the stimulus to change.
And so this is very much like a field-based athlete needs this ability. So we build that, basketball athletes, stuff like that. So compared to like our strength athletes where they only have to do this once, so we need full replenishment. So that's when we're talking about 3 to 5 minutes recovery for those guys. So they're using the same energy system, but once. It's a one effort. You know, throwers, weightlifters, all that kind of stuff. We're gonna go in 5 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Max. Time. Going again in 5, 3, 2, 1, let's go. Halfway. Time. So now we're trying to develop more of the glycolytic system. So remember guys, and you understand this more, you're never using one system in isolation. It's more about the percentage of contribution. So when we're trying to have more of the energy being from the glycolytic system, so this is somebody who needs to do longer runs in their sport.
Usually that 20 to 40 second range.
You know, or they've had to, you know, don't think just straight line as well. Remember those guys, if they're in like sort of defense and they're going sideways, 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 that's 20, 30 seconds of work. Maybe like a defense player in AFL,
Yep.
When they're, you know, something like that. Soccer players, you know, that kind of stuff. They're doing that. It's not just 40 meters straight. If they're crossing 5, 5, 5 on different angles, that'll add up to about 20 seconds. And it's actually harder when you're doing agility work.
Yeah.
So that's very much field-based guys. So the intensity is probably a little bit lower. Those guys aren't usually, you know, you're not running at 100% there, but it's still intense. Okay, so it's not like 40%. We're looking at that 80 to 90%. We usually have an active recovery when we use the glycolytic system, mainly because it replenishes quicker and we recover quicker. But it's also very relevant to the sport, or most sports, where you'll have an effort and then you might be walking, but you're still on defense watching the game, so you don't stop. You don't lie down.
Also very much for recovery as well.
Yeah.
Anyone who's gotten themselves into that kind of lactate area with the local muscular burning, if you stop and sit still, there's nothing to shuttle that those lactate and that metabolites out of the system.
Yeah.
Whereas with a passive rest, we're still getting a muscle pumping action, which is going to flow all that waste product back to the heart for digestion.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll know for yourself, if you run really hard, get yourself burning locally and then sit still, it's going to hang around for a long while. Muscle damage is going to be worse because of that change in pH. It's a very acidic environment.
Yeah.
Whereas if we do something to keep the body moving, it's going to help shuttle waste out.
And remember, like, especially if we're in the sports realm, these guys got to do this for like 80 minutes as well. So it's got to be at a level, we're going to stimulate the ability to do this, but for prolonged periods of time. So if we just go in and do like a 10-minute, like as many reps as possible type activity, have we actually improved their ability to do that over an 80-minute period? You know, they can work at a higher intensity, but it's definitely like not building that ability to recover and keep going for a long period of time. So yeah, with if we're designing these type of intervals, it'd be sort of 20 seconds on, 80 to 90% efforts or intensity with 40 seconds of active recovery. So you'll see me do this one in the video after this.
5, 3, 2, 1, we're on. That's it, hold that. Halfway. 5, 3, 2, 1, rest. Twenty seconds. Ten. 5, 3, 2, 1, we're on. Halfway. 3, 2, 1, good.
And then what we also write is sometimes you write like a longer intervals for a bit of a, it's still very much in the anaerobic system, but you're sort of getting to that point where you're starting to have more contribution from the aerobic system as well.
So it's usually just slightly above that aerobic capacity.
Yeah, and you guys are going to learn about the anaerobic threshold. So, and this is the kind of training you can do to try and make your anaerobic threshold higher. So you can use this with many different athletes. You can field-based guys all the way to like endurance guys where we're trying to increase their capacity. So it's more of a sustained effort, but the intensities I wrote low intensity there, but it's probably more of a medium intensity.
Yeah.
So, because low intensity in my mind is like 40%. But it can be like a 1-to-1 ratio, so you might be doing 1 minute on, 1 minute off. You know, in boxing we sort of do 2 minutes on, 1 minute off, or 3 minutes, 1 minute off. So there's a range in this area, but you're no longer in that full hardcore intensity, but it's still very much, you're not in that steady state jogging type energy system either.
Yeah.
So you're still getting some contribution from the anaerobic system, but the aerobic system is very present as well. It's probably a good way to say it.
Do you think if we push too hard, we're going right to the other end of the spectrum? We're not getting much development in that aerobic system.
Yeah.
So we need to kind of put some reins in place so we stay within the kind of bridging area of two energy systems.
Yeah. And you know, with this one-on-one, we've got 1 minute at 70 to 75% intensity with a 1 minute recovery. I find these ones are actually harder to figure out the intensity. So you'll see Graham on the bike, he hit it pretty well.
The first one, yeah.
But it's hard to sort of gauge that, you know, you'll be able to make 70% and you didn't do it too easy and you didn't do it too hard. So I definitely suggest you have a go at that next time you can get to a gym, get on a bike and do say 6 1 minute on, 1 minute off. Because it is pretty hard to figure out the actual intensity that you need to be at without any, you know, earlier VO2 max testing and stuff like that. And critical power, which you guys will learn about in XPhys too. So that's it for the slides. Yeah, it's 5 seconds, 3, 2, 1, and go. It's halfway. Time to go. 2, 1. Minute rest. Yeah. It's halfway. Five, 3, 2, 1, let's go. Halfway. Fifteen to go. Five, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay guys, we filmed a little exercise library just in addition to the slides for this tutorial. Like I said in the slides, it's very much a tutorial that we did and we just went out and had a go at all these exercises. So very hard to transfer it over into the technology-based learning, but if you've seen them, at least then you know what they're for, and then you can have a go of them later on. So I'm just going to play this video and then just discuss what we're doing and what the modifications do, and some things that we're looking for as well. So we're going to start off with the rope waves, and you've probably seen this, you know, in the local gyms and that these days. Relatively, this is pretty new. You didn't see many people doing rope waves, you know, 10 years ago. It wasn't really such a big thing. So when you're looking at the movement pattern here, so the waves and the double wave like this, it's very much you use it for a conditioning drill of the upper body, whereas if you see now Graham's doing a slam, still conditioning the upper body, but now we can incorporate a triple extension. So, you know, just by changing how Graham does it there, we've changed the focus. So if you can see here, I'm doing waves. It's very much deltoids, shoulders, and you've got a fair bit of biceps working there as well. So very, you're going to get lots of peripheral adaptation. So the muscles themselves that are working are going to get better at doing that. Same thing here with the double wave. Oh, yeah. So you can see it's very much a conditioning-based drill. We're increasing the local muscular endurance in the shoulders. Whereas if we go like this with the waves, then we can add in that triple extension. You can see I'm still maintaining a nice straight lumbar back, usually, you know, nice and braced around the core. So we don't have that over flexion under load, but you can see we've just adjusted the movement pattern, and we've got a different focus. Now you may have seen a little bit of the band work in the gym, and there's a lot of different ways to use the bands. We've just chosen the squat because it was really easy to see. So we refer to this as accommodating resistance. So you can see as Graham is reaching the end of the exercise, which is usually, it's starting to get easier, the bands will actually make that easier part harder. One of the main benefits of this is during a normal squat, if we weren't going to leave the ground, at some point Graham has to start decelerating, but with the bands, he can accelerate all the way through the movement. And it can change the force velocity curve a little bit, and so it's a good little overload stimulus, or even sometimes just a novel stimulus. Can be used very well for time under tension. And then you can see, if you pay attention, we played with the reps a little bit here. So we're doing tempos of, I think it was 2 down, 2 up. And then the last ones here, we went down slow and exploded out. And just the band allows me to explode a little bit harder on the top half of the movement. We don't have that restriction where I have to stop. Obviously, You can play around with the weights and the tempos to get different results, but very popular now and it's very effective. The bands do a similar thing. The chains. So it's still an accommodating resistance. As the chain deloads there, so at the bottom, which is usually the sticky point or the hard point, the barbell actually gets a little bit less loaded. So the weight itself becomes lighter, and I can push out a little bit harder, and same thing, I can accelerate through the full movement. The other benefit of the band is because they wobble, we get all that stabilizer work at the shoulder joint. So the bands are great. Again, you can add that to many exercises, deadlifts, squats. You just got to change the lengths of the bands, but you'll see them a lot used in the bench press exercise. So they're great. Changes the force velocity curve, changes time under tension if you play with it. So there's many different ways to utilize those. We didn't go too hardcore on the carries because in the advanced core session we did a lot of the suitcase carries, but you can see here where Graham's developing ability to hold on to the bar for a period of time. So we can change the length and the load and this kind of stuff, but when we're holding on, we're working grip strength under isometric contraction. My upper traps are working a lot there. Core, everything's got to work to stabilize it, and then we're doing it for a longer, drawn-out period of time, so we're developing endurance. And you can make those much longer, much heavier. There's many different ways to modify this exercise. Main thing is that your pick up and drop down is good technique, so it should look exactly like a deadlift, nice and controlled. So we threw burpees in. Both Graham and I are not burpee fans, so I got Graham to do the first ones here were of better technique, and then we sort of slowly degraded his technique. And this is what happens when people are under fatigue. So if you watch here, this is what you see a lot. So there's this hyperextension of the spine. Happens a lot when people start getting tired. And then, I don't know if you guys can see my arrow when I'm moving it in this Zoom meeting. The other thing that you start seeing is, this sort of pointless ones, sort of what Graham does here. So what are we doing? What are we trying to achieve? And then the other one that I really don't like is you see people drop down onto their arms and wrists quite heavy when they get tired. So you'll see Graham, and it's hard to show you in a demo, but they sort of just drop on their arms. So there's a lot of force and a lot of pressure going through the shoulder joints. Another drill you see a lot is the mountain climber, and I think I talked about in the core class that I quite like it when it's a strict mountain climber. So just at the start here, you can see I'm doing it nice and slow and controlled. So I'm getting a lot of core work. But once we start turning it into a conditioning drill, and this is what you start seeing here, what I'm doing here, all that lumbar flexion and sort of, the risk reward doesn't stack up anymore. Why are we doing that exercise? What are we trying to achieve? Box jumps again, we talked about that plyometrics. Remember, plyometrics is very much quality over quantity. And then what people have decided to do, so this is how we've taught you to get the most out of it if we're trying to develop power, is we'll do something like this where we step off, generating as much power as we can, influence rate of force development, getting those muscle fibers that we want. And then we start seeing this conditioning-based box jumps. So you got to remember, every time you land, Graham's absorbing a lot of force there. And we did that last bit there because you'll see a lot of people scrape their shins on the old box jump as well when they fall like that. But again, what is your purpose? What are you trying to achieve if you're doing box jumps for conditioning? Does your sport require multiple jumps like this? That's the kind of, again, it always comes to me as the risk reward. So people get messed up a lot on this. They fall off the boxes, they rip their shins apart. And my question is, for what? Because we can do other exercises for conditioning. As we discussed, the peripheral adaptations of conditioning-based training are very similar at the muscle for anything that's sort of in that range. So another great implement training tool that's coming up. This shouldn't last too long, sorry guys. There you go, scrape your shins. The tire flip, if you haven't had a go at the tire flip, it's a great exercise. You just need to ensure that you get the correct technique. So you can see Graham's got a nice straight back there. He's in that good deadlift position, but the only difference is you push more anteriorly when you're pushing into the tyre flip. Landed on the knee and push. You can see I was super happy about the tyre being full of water, which often happens when you go grab it. So it was a really nice hot day too, so the tyre was boiling hot. But again, you can do it, you can get a nice heavy tyre and you're doing, you know, single reps of something heavy, and it becomes more of a strength power exercise depending on how fast you do it and how heavy it is. You can have partners where you're going back and forth so you get a little bit of rest, or you can do a lighter tyre for multiple flips at, you know, 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off, or, you know, something like that where we're getting that more conditioning out of it, and it's a total body conditioning tool. Again, it comes with its risks. Great implement training, people really enjoy it, but a lot of people can't do the correct technique, so you're gonna have to take time on coaching and ensuring their back is nice and strong and their core strong. Keg toss, great triple extension exercise. If you can get a hand on that, get your hands on some old kegs. These ones are actually empty, but you can, you know, half fill them to create that variation in the resistance. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. So if you saw Graham just then, his videos are a little quick. This is a great one for triple extension. So he's getting that drive through the hips, knees and ankles. So that's sort of developing that plyometric power type strength there. And you'll see the strongmen do this. They have to throw it over like a high jump bar. And then, you know, if we wanted to develop some rotational power, you know, we could do something like this. So this, again, this kind of stuff's limited to your imagination, but you just want to ensure that they have the prerequisite core strength and no back pain and all that kind of stuff. Sleds, so you can do multiple different ways of developing the, using the sled. So it can be used for developing acceleration and power and speed if you change the weights up. So I think in performance enhancement, you'll talk a lot more about this. So if you're trying to develop speed, your weight's going to be a lot lower. And if you're trying to develop acceleration, it can be a little bit heavier. And if you're trying to do conditioning, we'll do it for time. So there's definitely different ways there. The way I just did it then is generally what I'll do for sort of conditioning, just to be mean. So you're getting just a lot of sort of quad glute conditioning when you push that for that full length of the track. And then, you know, this is like the next one here we do is like a acceleration sprint training drill. So you can see my legs are pumping more like a piston and I'm just driving through the hips. So just that change in stance and position, I can be now working on some acceleration drills. So this would be more of like a warm-up acceleration drill rather than like when you do a sled, like a pull with the ropes. And one of my favorites here is backward pull. That's very much a conditioning tool. There's, well, you know, rugby league players run backwards a lot of field-based guys run backwards a lot, but you're just getting a real, you know, a lot of development in the quads there. So the sled, changing the weights here, this is a good way. So that would probably be better for an acceleration drill at that weight. And so I'm at that 45-degree angle. You guys will talk about that in biomechanics and performance enhancement. So probably too heavy for top end speed, but you can see that I'm in that sort of acceleration angle there. I'm not standing tall. So you might only do, you know, 20 meters max. And, you know, thinking about your energy systems there, we're going to have a decent break with this if we're trying to develop acceleration, because it's all ATP creatine at that sort of 20, 30 meters. So again, you change the exercise for different goals. Because that can be done as a conditioning tool too, but whether that transfers into your acceleration ability, if you keep doing it too much, you might actually negatively transfer because their technique changes, and that's what happens if you load the sled up too high. The technique will change to overcome the resistance. This is one of my favourite to put in boot camps. Very much I use it for upper body conditioning. So if we go back a little bit there, you know, there's not many exercises that you can do in the gym where you get this alternating arm pulling exercise, which is, you know, that's how the upper body would have worked, you know, in climbing and stuff like that. It's one hand over another using alternating grips. So that's lats, a lot of lats and arms getting conditioned there, but I also use it as a big core strengthening exercise as well. So I think that's a very natural movement pattern. At the end here, we threw in just a couple of conditioning drills. Me looking very cool there. So this one here is one we used to use with the rugby league guys a lot, so they were called Malcolms. There's a couple of different ways people do Malcolms, but you can see that it's very specific. I had a little slip there, to what a rugby league athlete would need to do. So we're just doing 10 metres and 20 metres repeats, hitting the deck, because they'll either wrestle or be tackled. And then there's a little bit of a longer distance one here. And at the Titans, we used to make them do 6 sets of 6 Malcolms. So that was 1 set there. But at the end of that, we'd kick the ball and make them do a 40-metre sprint. So it was almost like a set of 6. There's another one here. So that would be very much an anaerobic conditioning type drill. Another one here that Graham does quite often with his basketball players is we've got a 20-metre track, and it's 10 reps, 10 sets at 10 seconds. So his rest will be based on how fast he runs the 20-metre sprint. So it's very much, he's doing ATP creatine in the sprint, but he's got minimal ability to recover. So once he's, we've got that like rapid recovery early with ATP CP, but that's still sort of 30 seconds. So he's getting a little bit of replenishment, and then he's going again. So it becomes very much ATP CP and aerobic system work here. So if you just watch, we did the full 10 sets. He was blowing after this one. So the quicker you get across, the longer your rest is. So it's very much, that was he wouldn't have stepped into too much glycolysis or the second energy system. I can't remember how far you guys have gone into energy systems. So the aerobic system's replenishing that. So great for field-based athletes, running-based athletes. He uses it for basketball players a lot because they need to do that repeated sprint work. So again, if you wanted them to be at max speed, he'd need more rest. But for a lot of those sports, they have to do this sort of repeated sprints where they don't get heaps of rest. So we can mix that up a little bit, and this one he's getting about 4 seconds rest in each one. So he's got to tap into his other energy systems as well as his ATP CP. The other stuff that I've talked about, when we're doing the 6 seconds on, 24 seconds off, that's getting, he's getting more replenishment of the initial system so that we can sprint harder. So that will give us a different result too. So we're teaching the body to use the ATP system quickly and replenish it quicker. Whereas this would be more like a phosphate decrement where we're pretty much not giving him any chance to use that anymore. So he's going to go very much into the other systems. You can see he does a lot of running here. It was decently hot though, so to give him some credit. I think this is the last one here. So, like I said earlier, it's not an exhaustive list. We just wanted to show you different kinds of anaerobic or sort of conditioning exercises you can do and the different implement tools that you can use. Like I said, once you get a chance, try and look up a lot of those strongman exercises and have a go, because it's a great way of developing full body strength. They are a lot more popular now, so you guys have probably been more exposed to it than, say, if you're doing this course 10 years ago. There was no ropes, and farmers carried bars and kegs and sleds, and you barely got a sled in the gym back then. So it might not be too new to you, but it's in relative terms of the industry, it's become popular lately. And the only other things I'd say is that really think about what you're trying to achieve. So are we trying to do like a anaerobic test where we're using a lot more glycolysis? Are we trying to use ATP CP and give them recovery so that it can be replenished, or are we trying to burn that system out and then they've got to use more of their sort of aerobic system? And I'm not going too hard on the energy system stuff because you guys are doing exercise physiology next semester. But just keep in the back of your mind whenever you're programming, is the skill transferable? Is the energy system relevant? What kind of recovery do we need? Those are the kind of things that you need in the back of your head.